So in this video, we're going to look at how to make the player actually stick to the wall instead of just sliding down it. One of the ways we're going to do that is to manipulate the player's own gravity scale and make him stop once he touches the wall. To get started, we'll need to create a new behavior. Let's go into our scripts and behavior folders and create a new C# script called stick to wall. And then we'll open that up in MonoDevelop. Now we'll need a few properties to make this behavior work, but before we add them, let's extend our abstract behavior. Next, we'll want to make a Boolean to keep track of whether we're actually on the wall or not. Let's make this public, type it to Boolean, and call it onWallDetected. Next, we'll make two protected properties, one to keep track of the default gravity scale, and the other for the default drag. Next, in our start method, let's actually get the values of the player's gravity and drag once this behavior comes online. To do this, we'll get the reference from the body 2D of the gravity scale. Let's do the same thing with the drag. Now we'll need to create two new methods, one that gets called when we stick to the wall and one that gets called when we're off of the wall. We'll make these protected. The first will be called onStick, and the other will be called offWall. Now, inside of onStick, we're going to want to detect that the player is not standing, but that they're actually moving up, in this case that the velocity is greater than 0. Here, we're going to create a condition where we check to make sure that we're not standing and that the body's velocity is actually greater than 0, meaning that he's moving up. Inside of the condition, we'll set the gravity scale to 0 and the drag to a very high number. This will keep the player from actually sliding down the wall once we get them to stick by changing the gravity scale. Now, in our offWall method, we'll need to reset all the values once we've detected that we're no longer attached to a wall. In order to do that, we're going to make sure that the body's gravity scale is not equal to the default gravity scale. What that means is that we'll know that in this case, we need to reset the values because they're different from what we're expecting. In order to do that, we'll simply go to the body 2D's gravity scale and make sure that it does not equal the default gravity scale. Inside of this condition, we'll reset our values. Here, we're setting the gravity scale back to the default gravity scale we detected when the script started, and we're also doing the same thing with the drag. Now, let's modify the update method to allow us to detect when we're actually sticking to the wall or not. Before we do that, let's make this protected virtual. Inside, we're going to want to do a basic test to see if we're actually on the wall or not. We'll use the collision state onWall property to detect this. Now, we have a flag here called onWallDetected. It's very important that since this update loop is constantly running, we don't want to keep resetting this value over and over again, especially when we start disabling other scripts because we're attached to the wall, such as jump. We wouldn't want to keep calling that over and over again, or we'd have some performance issues in our game. So we're going to take advantage of this flag, onWallDetected, and use that to make sure that before we actually call onStick and offWall, we're in the correct state. To get started, let's make sure that we're not currently on the wall when we detect that we've attached to the wall. Once we see that we've collided with the wall and we haven't already flagged that we're on the wall, we can actually call onStick. Next, we'll want to make sure that we disable any scripts that are not needed to run while this behavior is active. And finally, we'll set our onWallDetected flag so that we know that we've already done all of these steps. Inside of the other condition, when we detect that we're not on the wall anymore, we're going to make sure that if the last state was onWallDetected equal true, that we disable that, reset our scripts, and call offWall. Here you'll see we're testing if onWall is true. We'll call offWall to detach. We'll toggle our script back to true, and we'll reset the onWallDetected flag. Let's save our changes and go back into Unity. We'll select our player, and let's add this script to our player. Next, we'll want to make sure that when we're attached to the wall that we disable jump. For this particular script, we're going to disable jumping. So when you stick to the wall, you can't get off unless you move back in the opposite direction. Now, let's save our changes and run the game. In this case, you should be able to stick to the wall. I've jumped, I've attached to the wall, and I'm no longer having to hold the left key to stay on that wall. If I hit the right key, you'll see that the player detaches himself. So now that we're stuck to the wall, the other thing that we can demonstrate, if we give focus back to the player, is that if you pull the player off the wall, you'll see over on the right in the script that on-wall detected is no longer selected. If we let go, the player returns to his normal state. And this is the basic technique for making a player stick to an object or no longer move by changing the gravity and also altering the drag so the player doesn't slide down. Now, there still may be cases where the player slides down, and this isn't a perfect solution. So in the next video, we're going to talk about extending this class and building out a better slide logic so that it looks more intuitive in what you'd expect from a platformer.